Hello, Craig.
Hello, Craig, and hello, audience. It's B, and we're here with. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Andrew from the First Watch. We're a cinematic actual play and a podcast set in a original homebrew world where the planes of existence are less than stable.
Very exciting. I wanted to talk a little bit since by the time you will be hearing this, episode 2 of Parallel to Anywhere will be out, and that will be the episode where uh, our character Tref's paths crossed with people from the world of the First Watch. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your world, a little bit about that session, the out of game weirdness of it all, and just a little bit more about what you do.
For sure. Yeah, no, it was a super fun recording. The whole concept of Parallel to Anywhere is super fun. I was really glad to be able to be a part of it.
I was really glad you were able to be a part of it. I'll be honest. When I first started this project, I wasn't super sure who would get into it.
Sure.
You know, it was so weird and not. I don't want to say it in the like aggrandizing way, but in the very like, oh, this will be hard to sell. Unlike anything anyone's ever done in the space,
Yeah. And it's funny because when you pitched it to me, I felt like I was looking at a mirror of sorts because we have our podcast, The Inn at the Edge of Greenwood, which is almost the inverse of Parallel to Anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's it's a dedicated location in our world where other folks find themselves and visit the inn and tell a story and then go back to their home world. So we're kind of drawing everybody to us, but then Parallel to Anywhere is kind of the inverse of that, in that you're following a character hopping to different worlds. So I felt I had a lot of the same sort of reservations when I was first pitching In at the Edge of Greenwood to people, because I was like, I don't know how to explain this. It's it's all role play, no real dice. It's cozy, but also like, I want to give space for creators to tell their stories, and it's just like it took a while to like find the right words for it. And so I relate very much to that same sort of like, when you don't have something that's super obviously like, oh yeah, it's like this other show, it can be hard to put into words exactly what you're trying to do.
Oh, for sure, and is especially different. I remember when we first talked. One of the early ideations of that one shot was just Tref ending up in the inn.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was a very early pitch for that, and uh, so I guess I want to ask you, when did that turn into what happened? When did the characters from the one shot get involved, and the forest
Yeah.
becoming mangled by the Watch's residual magic? Like, I didn't give a ton, and I know that for like Tref's lore to a lot of the DMs, because
Sure.
I wanted people to tell their own stories. Originally I was really thinking of this as like he would just show up in the middle of a random thing,
Right. Right.
Um, and people took that in a lot of different directions. But I think one of the things I really like about this episode is that there is a there's a danger and a threat, but the threat is simultaneously very big in scope and very local in solution. And I was just, how did you come to those ideas?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I like that has been kind of like a I guess a bit of a theme, this idea of like trying to localize and bring down to a base level some of these larger things. Like, our main show starts very local with just like hunting, down trolls that are causing problems with loggers, and eventually expands into, hey, we got to save the world. But always trying to keep it kind of, grounded. And I think that's just kind of like where my storytelling sensibilities are. Like,
Hmm.
it's a big world anytime you try to create a full homebrew world, and there's a lot of different like conflicting viewpoints and, characters with their own motivations, and it's like that can be a lot to juggle. Like, let's just try to get down and tell a story about, one set of people. as far as like where it switched from being something with the inn to something different, I wrestled a lot with, where does the character, of Trevor kind of like fit in a lot of things, because I wasn't sure how sci-fi I wanted to get with it. Our world is more of a medieval fantasy world. And so I kind of went back and forth on, should this be canon? Should this be something that's not canon? Is the inn the best place for it, etc.? And after kind of thinking through all that, what I landed on was like, well, let's not do the inn, because I think that there's some limitations and there's some structure to the Inn at the Edge of Greenwood episodes that didn't necessarily fit for your what you're trying to do with Parallel to Anywhere. I was like, let's bring it to a different part of the world. And I do like it as a canon episode. I do consider it canon to our larger story, because the whole point of our world is that planes of existence are merging and people are hopping from plane to plane, and who's to say they're not hopping from time to time as well. So from there, it was a matter of actually figuring out just who was available cast-wise to
Right,
be
of
in it.
course. Mhm.
And when Joe and Cheryl were both available, well, Joe had already played that character of Wolfram in our Knights of Excessa miniseries. And I just kind of started from there and was like, well, it just kind of made sense that if there was some sort of disturbance near the capital, like the knights would be deployed. So then Cheryl built out Tink to be a new knight that we hadn't seen before in our content, and it was a fun way to bring Wolfram back and give Joe a little more time to roleplay that great character. And so that's just kind of how we built it from there. It was a lot of like with most things, there's a lot of like little decisions that finally kind of culminated in what we recorded.
It was a lot of fun, and as someone who also loves Planar Chaos in their storytelling,
Yeah.
It's a lot of those decisions don't really, and you could tell me if this is different, but for my money, a lot of the time they don't usually have a big sit down and brainstorm moment. They're more just
Sure.
like
Yeah.
100 little light bulbs that flick on throughout your
Yep.
week.
Yep.
And I think that's really funny, because I think that's I think people, when they're doing a lot of writing and a lot of creation, especially for one shots and stuff, they feel this need that like they need to have like a massive sit down time to work it all out,
Right.
But I feel like the process is a lot more, like you said, working with what you're given and making the most of these situations and everything.
For sure. I mean, like, I don't often I guess I did it recently because we're about to start a new campaign, and I did like take an entire day to just sit down and write out all the NPCs and the towns and stuff. But like outside of that, which is just like the heavy work that you have to do as a DM, like there is not ever really a dedicated ideation time on anything. Like
Oh
it is
no.
just like kind of making sure I have something nearby to jot notes with as I think of things throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the months. And it's a luxury when you have time to sit and germinate on that stuff. I mean, I can come up with the lore and the plot needed for a one shot in a pinch, but if you give me 2 months to think about it, you're obviously going to get something very different and hopefully more fleshed out.
Exactly.
But time is a luxury for sure sometimes with
Oh
this
yeah.
content.
And I think one of the cool things about the way that we approached this whole thing was that while we did set up days for setting up the one shots and everything, uh, we only started putting work on the series final after all the one shots were done,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that let us like give a good amount of time. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that was a really fun element to it. Is
Yeah, it's super smart. I do a similar thing with the Edge of Greenwood, where each episode has a bookended narration by the innkeeper,
Mhm.
where he's talking and he's writing in his journal.
Yes.
And I will maybe jot notes down after recording an episode with a guest about things that he needs to mention in there. But I kind of like waiting to record at least a good chunk of the guests for a season before writing all those, because that's also where I can start to like build in story themes and like, oh, this person reminded me of this other person and stuff like that. And when you again, when you have the luxury of time and the ability to kind of see things in their completeness, you can more what's the word I'm looking for? You can more intentionally create a flowing narrative.
For sure. Yeah, so I guess another thing I wanted to ask is like on a wider scale, moving a little bit away from just this one specific adventure. Uh a lot of high fantasy stories tend to stray from the weirder elements, you know?
Mm,
Um the stuff like the planescapes and the spelljammers don't necessarily jive
yeah,
in a fantasy setting, you know?
yeah,
Um and though personally your planescapes or spelljammers have been some of my favorite stuff, you know, like
for sure.
um there's about those things makes it appealing, even in say a world like that's more high fantasy, in a world that's maybe
Yeah,
not, if you would put it, a world that's not ready to meet these challenges yet. What about
yeah,
like even in a world that like that? What about those concepts to you makes them like, oh, I still got to go for it anyway?
sure. Yeah. Well, and I mean, think first of all, the reason that I think that they don't jive as well, or at least people don't latch onto them as much, is because you already have to ask yourself the question, what in the world would the world be like with magic, right? Like if
Right.
magic's a thing and people can do spells and you can, die and get resurrected and all these different things, like, how does that affect politics and commerce and, the arts and all those different things? And that's a really big question. So
Hmm.
then, when you layer on top of already this magical world, where I think a lot of DMs are trying to come up with creative ways to, make their world feel like it's integrated with the abilities of magic, then you add plane, hopping on top of that and all that stuff. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot to juggle, and I think it gets maybe less used because of the fact that there is a very real question of like, if we could just move to a different plane of existence, like what would, like, no one knows exactly what that would look like as far as like the trickle down effects of that on the rest of
Right.
society. That being
Hmm.
said, one reason I really like it and one reason I like doing it in our stuff is, and the way I handle it personally, is to maintain a sense of mystery about it. Like, it is uncontrollable in my world. There's nothing currently technology wise or whatnot that allows people to fully harness the power of the planes and
Right.
jumping from one to the other. It's something that happens via thunderstorms and earthquakes and blizzards, and it's almost more of a weather effect than anything a lot of
It's a
times.
force of nature to a degree.
Exactly, exactly. So when I thought about bringing in your character and kind of merging with Parallel to Anywhere, I was like, this can work as long as, and again, another reason for the way the story played out. I was like, this can work and be canon without being like, game changing, if it's in kind of an isolated situation, right? If it's deep in a forest and a couple characters meet Treffer, and there's definitely some impact, but it's not like you bamfed into the middle of the kingdom, into
Right.
the middle of
Hmm.
the king's court and completely shook things up. Although
Right.
who knows,
The
they, might just go, oh, weird wizard, well, we'll keep moving on with our lives.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what makes Tref a very good bounce in, bounce out protagonist, I
Yeah.
think, is because he is so young and because he knows so little about the way his own magic works, that
Yes.
uh for these characters who are coming in to check on this disturbance in the forest, it is very easy to write him off
Right.
as a fool. It is very
Well, and
easy to write
other
him
than
off
the
as someone who doesn't.
clothing,
Right.
being very, very different. I mean, they've seen magical devices before, like Tinks and Artificer, all this stuff. There's a lot that can be explained away, and it is kind of that whole like, magic is just science we don't understand yet type of thing.
Exactly. And I think it works very well because you're like you said, even if he did show up in the middle of the king's court,
Right.
but there's no way on earth he would have been able to explain what
Exactly.
what he had done, and that kind of thing is, I think makes it easier for the these pop-ins to not fundamentally tatter a world
For
setting.
sure. Have you read a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court?
I believe I've heard of it, but I've never
Yeah,
had it.
so I mean, it's Mark Twain. It's probably maybe my favorite book. But I mean, it's about a guy from the industrial age who gets transported somehow to King Arthur's age, and he in particular is kind of like an engineer, so he knows how to make things, and he sets himself up as basically a rival wizard to Merlin, and uses science to
Right.
create real magic, and he does completely change the world there, and it's a very interesting look at kind of taking that idea of what would happen if time and space kind of shifted, and how would that impact. And in a lot of ways, it's funny that you're talking about Treffer kind of like not really knowing things, because it's the opposite of that. It's this guy can explain the world very, very well, and
Right.
knows how things work and everything. And Treffer, on the other hand, is like, yeah, I just press buttons until it happens, which is such an
Pretty much.
endearing part of the character,
Yeah,
and part of why I think it works so well.
I agree. And moving into a little bit, because I know we can't speak too much for the characters' thoughts processes, because we don't have their players here. But one of the things I do think is really fun and interesting was that the watch malfunctions
Yeah,
very and that's a critical plot point. And I think so early into the season, seeing the watch as fallible
yeah,
is I think that's very important. And I think it like sets higher stakes maybe,
for sure.
because especially as like the first guest one shot that happens in the season, there's this a new comprehension of for lack of a better word, just how fucked he is. you know
Right, right,
it puts more of an emphasis on getting him home, because this thing could fall apart. This
right.
it is still just a tool that could break, and thankfully in this case the characters were able to find the missing pieces and put it back together. um so when Tink was created to be an artificer, did you have a hand in that, or was it more, oh, I can use this?
Yeah, no, it was much more of a I can use this. Yeah, Cheryl had full, kind of autonomy in what character she wanted to create. Um, all I gave her note wise was it needs to be another knight of Excessa, so somebody who, would be in that position. And it was really interesting because like I was expecting a fighter or a paladin or a rogue or something, and she came with this artificer that is less of a warrior and more of a scholar. And it was interesting to kind of build out like, okay, why would this person be a knight
Right.
of this caliber? Because that's the thing, it's like the Knights of Excessa number about 21 total. I mean, they're like the SEAL Team 6 of of my
Yeah.
world.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's not just some sort of like, oh yeah, Tink is a knight. Like, no, there's Tink could seriously F you up, if
No,
he
there's a
wanted to.
right, there's a respect on that
Yes.
character's name, and you would need to address how that got to
Yeah.
be,
But it
basically.
was also so much fun for me just selfishly getting to build out my own world a little bit more, have Tink and Wolfram, because Wolfram's very much the scholarly knight. He's the reader of lore and the paladin who loves going to libraries. And then you've got Tink. So it was really the two nerds who got sent on this mission. And it was
Right.
fun to build out that side of things because in our mini series Knights of Excessa, they're very much like typical badasses. You know what I mean? Like they're jumping on rooftops and killing people in one stroke and things like that. And it was
Mhm,
fun
mhm.
to take those same kind of that same that team of people and see a different side that was more investigating
Right.
and problem solving, rather than just, oh, okay, I'm gonna go kill the first thing I see sort of characters.
Right, because even in those, like, high-brow quality, like the SEAL Team 6, you still gotta have your intel people, you still gotta have your
Absolutely,
your
yeah.
spec ops, and I think seeing I gotta agree, that's just a really cool thing, seeing that side of the section of your world that has to exist,
Right.
theoretically, right? Like, on paper, yeah, sure, it happens behind the scenes, but it's like, it's spending an episode with the B team kinda thing. it's spending an episode back at home base when the heroes are out, kind of thing, and that the draw of that maybe kind of thing.
Sure. And I think that's the other fun thing, not to talk about my own show too much, but like our main show follows the B team or even the C team. I mean, the Knights are the A team.
Right. Hmm.
But we don't really, other than the miniseries, this is the only other look into, like, they have not yet crossed over with our other main show and everything. So it was a cool opportunity to try a different genre, try a different type of game. I mean, it was obviously a very short one shot. You know, if we had another hour, there's definitely more that I would have done with like I had kind of like a subplot with like the little part for the watch gets stolen by an animal and you all have to track it down, and we just didn't have time for all of that.
No. Yeah.
Um, but no, it was a cool opportunity to flesh out a couple characters, to also get to meet Treffer and be a part of that story. But like I said, I went into it saying this is going to be canon, because I didn't want to pull punches and like, oh well, okay, we'll do this, but it doesn't really count. I was like, no, let's make this real.
Yeah. It was really fun. Um, I think it's very interesting that you bring up the that shifting perspective, because in the main series and in this episode's opening, you even though the one shot Tref is on his own, in the show proper, that's the first time that we see him alone, because in episode in the opening of 2, he is he's got Rosara by his side. He has
Yeah,
the intelligence, that role that I think you would say, like, maybe Wolfram and Tink would fit into the Knights, is sort of the role Rosara plays for Tref.
for sure.
And it's very fun pulling them away from their respective
Yeah.
things, but they accidentally end up being the exact, like, Tref is missing their intel person and they're missing their action-based people, and that
Right.
so accidentally happens to click. Like,
For sure.
that worked out really well.
Yeah.
I guess on a more general question, when you think of, like, kind of going into the wider space of, like, TTRPGs in general,
Yeah.
with shows like the Inn, like Parallel to Anywhere, and even with, like, the expanding world you have with the Knights going to other stuff, I think, like, especially now, there's this new thing put on us to do something different, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, the high adventures, the played straight campaigns, I feel like have been done fantastically by so many people, that there's, like, this space that needs to be filled, And I guess I want to ask you, as someone who also deals with, like, the planar chaos and the weirdness of it all, like, that excite you? Does that, like, what about it, that new breed? Because I feel like a lot of new
Yeah.
TTRPG shows recently have, like, interesting niches and interesting what ifs that put spins on the traditional campaign,
Yeah, for sure. And I agree, and I definitely think that it's great that everybody's kind of finding maybe their niche, and we're certainly trying to do things that are new for us, or that we haven't necessarily seen in the space. That being said, and this has kind of been my mantra since we started our show, um, we're not going to tell any stories that are brand new, right?
Right.
Like they're that biblical saying of "there's nothing new under the sun,"
Yes.
is very true.
Hmm.
And I often find myself, watching the newest episode of Critical Role, and all of a sudden Matt Mercer introduces a plot point that's part of something that I recorded, 2 months ago that I'm still editing. And I'm like, well, damn it.
Oh yeah,
I thought of that first, sort
right.
of thing.
And
And you
no
got to
one
be
thought of it
okay with
first.
that.
Yeah, and no
Yeah.
one thought of it first.
Right.
It's
Well, exactly. No one thought of it first. Somebody's always done it. Someone did it before me and him and whatnot. To me, quality is the biggest thing. Like, tell a good story, tell a story that you believe in. And no matter how quote unquote cliche it is with your tropes, like that's where you have to start. And
Mhm.
then you can build maybe some weirdness on top of that. But like, you know, a story that is completely based off of a gimmick
Yeah,
is a fun idea to think about. But it doesn't last very long,
it
right?
needs a
Like
soul. It needs a
it
soul
does.
base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that's been like my thing throughout, and where I think from the times that I've worked with you, we definitely align, is that like at the heart of whatever story we're telling, like this could fit in a lot of different places, it could fit in a lot of different worlds. The mean plots and everything like that could be reskinned a lot of different ways to be however you want it to be, but the
Exactly.
beating heart of it is still strong. And if you got
The
to have
human
good
element.
bones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that human element. I'm trying to remember who said a really good video I watched about like just something like words are bad and where this came from, but I really love the line that they threw out there at the very end that was like, even though all of these things are strange and maybe even a little out there, at the core they're intimately familiar.
Right.
Like it
Right.
doesn't. I think you could do anything really, and
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of the space is that there's such a openness in uh taking, because really at the end of the day, a campaign in any TTRPG, there is a core human element that's just going to naturally be found, which is
Mm,
these disparate people coming together, right?
sure.
And you can tell whatever other themings you want on top of that, but I
Yeah.
think the beauty of these kinds of stories is that at the very core there is always that is your base for everything. That is your point
Yeah.
zero, and you can go anywhere with that. And I think I agree with major thing our storytelling styles align in is that like come what may in terms of the setting or the
Uh-huh.
tone or the genre, if you have a very emotive and home feeling connection to
Yeah.
something, then it people will come for the weirdness, but they will stay for the heart.
Right. No matter how trippy we get, we're still telling stories about courage and about choice and
Mm-hmm.
about um you know sacrificing for the ones you love, and about helping someone in need. Even the episode for this show, the Tink and Wolfram exemplify, and this is totally the characters' decisions, the players' decisions, but I think they exemplify, doing their duty, and sussing out what needs to be sussed out, but also like helping this person in need, in Treffer, and it's like
Yeah.
that is a theme that is universal and could have been told a million different ways. It just happened to be the heart of this story.
Yes, especially
Yeah.
because Tref is a child.
Right.
Like that, I think the lost child looking for their place in the world
Yep.
is a very it's one of those ones that hits a lot of people, and I
It
think
does. Yeah, because
I
we don't outgrow it, right?
no, no, we never do,
We think we
and
do,
that's
but like every once in a while, you're in your 30s to that, like, oh my gosh, I'm still a kid trying to find my place, and
exactly,
some of those
yeah,
themes stay relevant for forever.
exactly, and I think like the beauty of the characters that Tink and Wolfram played out was that they were these older, wiser people who,
Mm,
like, they didn't have all the answers, but
right.
they were willing to try anyway,
Right.
and that, again, that theme of a lost person and two people who don't know how to help completely but are willing to try, like you said, could be done a bajillion other ways, could be done in so many different settings and genres. It's just this one happened to involve a planar hopping watch and a
Right.
crumbling forest.
Exactly. Question for
Uh,
you, because
mhm.
at the time of recording this chat, this episode has not come out yet, and I know that we released it on our own channel as kind of like our own condensed one shot. What did you end up calling it?
Okay, so there's a fun thing in Parallel to Anywhere's naming scheme for the episodes because the show is diegetic to Trevor. He is recording this.
Yep.
So when we were naming the episodes, a thing that mattered to me was that they sounded like episodes Tref would name,
Yeah.
not just that we would name. And so it turned into us naming them after song titles,
Interesting.
specifically like kind of we kind of sat and thought about what kind of music the characters would like. we made
Hmm.
character playlists, and then we picked songs that were in that vein. So that episode specifically is a title from the Oh Hellos, the people who got very big for Soldier Poet King.
Yep.
Um, and it's one of their quieter instrumental pieces, and it's called Dry Branches,
Interesting.
which is this very moody title.
Yeah.
And I think it hits in the sense of it's a song title. It is from this very like folksy band,
Yeah.
and coming the fun part about the song title style is that the genres that these songs come from come through in the titles and hit like a truck in terms of
Yeah.
the whiplash, because episode 1 is Next Up Forever by AJR, and episode
Hmm.
3 is a line from Starlight Brigade, and in the middle of it is this moody kind of
Yeah.
folksy sound. And I think like tying the worlds he visited to musical sound
That's
was
awesome.
something that I didn't consider at first, but after it started being a concept for the way we would title the episodes, it was something that
Well, and again,
I
the value of being able to have the time to kind of let it marinate and step back and go, what makes the most sense for this holistically.
right, because like the choice to make them the way Tref would name them was something that took a while,
Yeah.
and even beyond that, deciding how Tref would come up with a naming title scheme would
Mm,
just be like music on his playlist was like, yeah, that's right, that's this character.
right.
It,
And it's so fun to compare that to what we did because when we released this recording as a video one shot, we called it A Wayward Wizard in the Forest of Fog,
right,
which
I
very
really
much so the two things there. One, um, I actually very much was riffing off of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court with kind of the lengthy, bouncy sounding title.
oh yeah,
Um, but then secondly, it's interesting to talk about perspectives because I did wrestle a little bit with like, do we allude to the sci-fi element of this or whatnot? And I did kind of think, well, how would Tink and Wolfram perceive this? Well, he's just a wizard. He's a weird ass wizard from some other plane,
right,
that's got some weird pants that sweat,
hmm
sort of thing. And that's how they
totally
would have
does
perceived
stuff.
it. They found a wayward wizard in the Forest of Fog, and
Exactly, and
it's so
he
interesting to see like, similar thought processes, but
but
very
go
very
in
different versions.
directions. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's so cool. And I think that's one of the beauty parts of this whole project is that we're going to get to see that with all the other creators. And that's why I was like, I was hit by this actually by Jazz, who is for Heartbeats, who had the idea of doing these kinds of mini interviews.
yeah,
And I thought it was like, after they said it, I was like, this is what this project was missing. This is the
yeah,
missing piece. This is it. Because like you get to hear the as Tref is going through these worlds, you get to hear our perspectives from the creators who, had to sit down and think these kinds of things out. And I think it leads to showing the human element, both in the characters and in the people who made them.
for sure.
Um, and I have one more question before we
Yeah.
call it for now. Uh, what is what is next for y'all? I know you guys started a new campaign, and I would feel remiss if I didn't let y'all go off a little bit about it, and but before we said goodbye.
Yeah, no, I mean our so currently as of recording this, we're midway through our third season of our main show, which is kind of internally called the Realm Shield Saga, and that's the show that follows our three monster hunters, Hyde, Siki, and Gamorg, as they get caught up in this world-ending type of thing. Got another mini series coming out at the beginning of March, which all new players, some repeats, but a lot of new players. Set a little bit more in the future, brand new story, new jumping in point for new audiences.
That's very important.
We'll
Yeah.
we'll of course build upon our world, but also be kind of a fresh story point. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's what we're deep into working on right now. And then also a second season of The End at the Edge of Greenwood because we finished season 1 and I very much was like, okay, it could end here. Like it really could. Like I'm happy with what we did. It captured the vibes and the things I wanted it from it, and I let it sit for a couple months, and then I went, I want to do more. Which
That's
is a really
beautiful. Yep.
cool, yeah, it's a really cool feeling to like, Yeah, no, that's something that I want to give my passion to. And so
Mhm.
we're midstream in recording season 2 and new episodes are coming out soon.
That's super exciting. In at the Edge of Greenwood seems like a very good jumping on point for people who may have gotten into the feel and the sci-fi weirdness of PTA to enter into your world space a bit. So I think that would be a really great, the new season's probably a real great jumping on point. Those new spaces are really good.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely. So each episode stands alone to a degree of In at the Edge of Greenwood because it's a different guest each time.
Mhm.
There's small narrative elements that tie throughout, so you'll certainly get more out of it if you kind of join us for the entire season. But that being said, if you look through the list of episodes and see a creator or a DM that has guested that you really like start there. It's each story's kind of self-contained um and it's funny because the format episode to episode is very similar, and I often worry about, oh my gosh, it's just going to start to feel repetitive.
Mhm.
um but every time I sit down, like I recorded an episode today before jumping on this call with you, and it was wholly unique. There were things that had never happened before, and whatnot. And it's just a testament to being able to get to talk to so many amazing creatives from
Yep,
across the TTRPG space.
for sure. Uh, I think that about does it for our time together, unfortunately. But do you want to one last time shout out some places where people can find you and your work?
Sure thing. So you can find us on YouTube. The First Watch Show is our YouTube URL extension. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at First Watch Show. And yeah, after listening to episode 2 of Parallel to Anywhere, if you want to check out the video version, we have it up on our channel as named as A Wayward Wizard in the Forest of Fog.
The video is very fun. I watched it a good deal of times when it came out just because it was like, like this is exactly what it was very fun. And I'm really excited for more in at the Edge of Greenwood and more of the new campaign. That must be super exciting. But I think for now that's a perfect place to wrap this up. Until then, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. So good to do this.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk to y'all later, everyone. I think the next thing we will be putting up will be episode 3, so that'll be really exciting. I will talk to y'all soon.